Hi everyone, welcome to Tales of Dread. This story is about the giants to the US military found in the mountains of Afghanistan. But before we start the story, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Let's dive into the story. I have seen the real evil and killed it. It has nothing to do with people. So, I've also killed a lot of them. But no one is as bad as real evil. Evil people are the only ones who can do horrible things and cause chaos. During my first tour of duty in Afghanistan, I hunted giants. They are the worst of the worst. I'm a ranger in the US Army. I've been in the military for 12 years, and I've seen and killed some of the scariest things you can think of. I haven't told anyone because I'm afraid of what might happen to me and my family if I did. Most nights, I can't sleep because I wish I could tell my wife what I've seen. The weight I have to carry is breaking my mind and soul. I'm really on top of things. I've kept it all to myself every night when I went to bed, until I couldn't sleep anymore. I knew a lot of the stories that my brothers in the Spec Ops and military communities had posted, and I finally felt like I had a way to talk about things. I went to check on some of the posters to make sure they were still alive. I guess the government thinks that people who don't sleep are lying. So they do not keep an eye on it. What I'm going to tell you is true. You have a right to know what's in the shadows and what they're hiding from you. You also have a right to know about the men and women who have died to keep the forces of evil at bay. If you don't agree, you can skip the next few paragraphs. Before I get to the crazy stuff, it's important that you know the basics of this backups community if you know anything about it. I promise that the next stories will be worth your time waiting. Tier 2 Special Operations units include the Green Berets, SEALs, Marine Force Recon, and Marcy. Tier 1 is made up of the CAGDEF group, and many of the groups I want to talk about had Tier 1 members from around the world, usually the SAS, and the Joint Task Force. The top 20.1% of the military are in Tier 2. Tier 1. Most of the time, only hires the best people from Tier 2. We all worked hard for years to get into schools for selection and qualification. We all have top secret security clearances. We're all good at killing, and if we talk about what we've done, we'll lose our freedom or our lives. Because we work in secret, our government uses special units to keep us safe. We are the best, have a lot of money, and can go anywhere in the world without getting permission from Congress. You'll be surprised by how many countries we're serving right now. Our track record is perfect, but we're usually close to the public. I'm 30 years old and have been in the military for 12 years. I went to Missouri and grew up in Kansas City. I'm in a military school at Fort Leavenworth right now while I work on my PhD from Kansas State, and wait to be sent to some hellhole for my next deployment. The good news is that I have a lot of time before I have to go back out again. During my first deployment to Afghanistan, I saw my first real evil for the first time. It was 2009. I remember looking at the computers in Kuwait while I was waiting for the number 130 to take me to background. I was happy. The Chiefs had just signed Matt Castle because they thought they would soon be in the Super Bowl. Anything to take my mind off what was going to happen. Loss of life, paralysis, or limbs. I was 24 and had just finished college a year before. I didn't even have a serious girlfriend. I had many reasons to live. I didn't think about it because I knew I would be in charge of the worst motherfuckers on the planet. My Rangers would get it done, and I'd be proud of them and my bad. At 2200 hours, I flew into Bagram with about a dozen other soldiers wearing Kevlar helmets and bulletproof vests. The C-130 was dark, and the only lights inside were dim green ones. The people around me looked like they were made of green alien skin. As the plane started to come down, the pilot told us to buckle up. He circled over the airfield and shot flares to make sure that no RPGs could hit us on the way down. Some people cried and whimpered in the corner while an NCO. The soldier yelled at me to stop being a bit, as he rolled his eyes and gave me a small smile. The ramp went down, making a loud metallic crack as it hit the cement runway hard. I got my gear together and went out into the night. A big staff sergeant yelled, "Get your ship and follow me." Staff Sergeant Vasquez is 65 years old, has a shaved head, and is built like a brick shithouse. He looks like the Hispanic version of The Rock. He showed me where the hooch was in the base's Spec Ops gated community. It was a storage container with 3 separate sleeping areas made out of plywood. He told me to put on my gear and go to the Tactical Operations Center. The commander gave me a job to do. I stood in the talk with my gun hanging from my sling and my leg holster blocked. I looked at the dozens of TV screens and soldiers listening to radios. There was a lot of talking in the room. There was too much talk. Something important was going on. "You're in charge." Lieutenant Colonel Williams came up to me and told me that I was now in the big leagues, so I should shut up and do what Captain Stone told me to do. Then he led me into a room off to the side. I took a look around and saw that this wasn't a normal mission. Staff Sergeant Vasquez sat with 8 other people at a table. "Don't carry any Ranger scrolls." I saw that there were 8 green berets there. My commander began his report by saying that Team 3 to 9 had been missing for about 4 hours in a lonely part of the L.S.A. mountains. Their last message got through, but it was broken. They were taking a CIA agent up into the mountains to a cave. No one has told us anything else. Team 357 is going to help find and save people. Your platoon, which includes Lieutenant Vasquez, is still on a mission for a few more days. During that time, you will learn from Captain Stone and his team. The information officer stepped in and gave the mission as much information as he could. I was pulled out of the room by my commander. "We don't know what's going on with the fund. Like always, the CIA are being sent back. They didn't tell the teams in us anything. I want you and Vasquez to find out as much as you can about the situation there. These jerks are killing our men, and we don't even know why." Captain Stone and his team were in 3 stripped-down Humvees, where I met them. They look like miniature dune buggies with guns on top. Captain Stone stared right at me. He was very strong-willed, but you could see worry in his eyes. He put his hands up over his head and told "Roger, sir, aim high." He meant that the enemy had bought the armor by firing headshots at them. He looked at me again with a very serious face and put his arm all the way up above his head and said, "Don't aim too high." I gave a nod, and we all got into the cars. Does he mean that from the top of the cave, they'll be heroes? I remember thinking that I tried to forget about it as we took off. When we left the back room, it was still dark and we were wearing NV. As we rode through the hot desert night, I kept looking around to see if anyone was sneaking up on us on the roads. I looked back at the big guys with beards on my team. They were all looking straight ahead, as if they knew something I didn't. They didn't care about the road at all, and their minds seemed to be a million miles away. It seemed like the real danger was much worse than what we had seen from the Hodges on the way. The LSE mountains were there. A couple of hours later, we arrived at a small combat outpost. Captain Stone told us that the mountain had ammo, grenades, water, and NVGS I grabbed my assault pack as one of the team members threw me some extra max and grenades. We moved up the mountain in a wedge shape after leaving the command post. When I saw the huge warriors with M4s, SCARs, M2 sniper rifles, and grenade launchers, I thought we couldn't lose. These guys have probably taken out whole groups of Al-Qaeda on their own. They had to look at the one that you get for killing other men. I felt like I was superhuman. On the road, I knew what was in store for us. We found the cave just as the sun was coming over the mountain. This guy's face was as red as blood as the darkness went away. The mouth of the cave looked like that of a huge snake. The opening was on the other side of a 10-15 foot high sheer ledge. As we got close, Captain Stone told us to keep our eyes up. Don't get too close. As we got within 100 meters of the cave, I noticed that the ground had something shiny on it. I gave the squad a sign to stop, and then I called Captain Stone. There was a radio over it. The mic had been ripped off, and the radio had a huge dent, dried black blood on the side, and chunks of skin and tissue. "Shit, James," was what Captain Stone said. As his face turned angry, he stood up. One of the team members pulled out some climbing gear, fastened it, and we all climbed the ropes as quietly as we could. I was the last one to climb. As I reached the top of the ledge, I saw the squadron lying down with their weapons pointed at the cave entrance. As soon as I got up, the rest of the team stood up and slowly moved toward the cave. One of the guys on the team took the lead and moved a few steps toward the cave. I could smell the worst smells you can imagine, like sulfur and rotten milk. I started to feel very sad and like there was no way out. It didn't give me the usual rush of adrenaline and heightened senses. Just as he put his hand up to tell us to stop, it felt bad. From the cave, I heard the deepest, loudest roar I've ever heard. It sounded like a mix of a man screaming and a lion roaring, but in an impossible way. Before we knew it, something huge ran out of the cave and stabbed him with a huge spear, lifting him 15 feet off the ground. I was shocked to see what looked like a big man. It was about 13 to 14 feet tall, and its shoulders were as wide as I am tall. It had long red hair and a red beard with a lot of hair. It wore a loincloth and walked on leather sacks. We were all still for a moment. This thing gave off an overwhelming feeling of pure, unbridled evil. Captain Stone finally yelled, "Headshots." We all started firing at its head and face at the same time. 9 soldiers each fired 3 magazines worth of bullets into the animal. It dropped me, who was still stuck on the spear, and started coming at me, shaking the ground with each step. It looked at me with its mouth wide open, showing me 2 rows of huge teeth. I felt like a loose end that a child was about to step on. It yelled something in a language I didn't understand, and its voice shattered my eardrums as its huge hand reached out to grab me. It finally fell, full of bullet holes, and its head and face caved in. Captain Stone shoots another 762 round into the giant's head, before going to see where he died. It took 3 of us to lift the spear, and 2 more to pull his body off the spear shaft, which makes a sucking sound as we do. The spear had torn out all of his chest. His ribs were broken and stuck straight out like crooked, jagged teeth. All of his organs were in a pile on the ground of the desert, and the 5 of us were covered in the warm, sticky blood. Captain Stone called the seat representative and asked for a ride. We all sat down and were quiet for what seemed like a long time. We usually joke around and tell the most inappropriate stories after a mission. It's a tradition, and it helps us deal with the horrors of war a little better today. What's changed? No one could see anything. Everyone was sad and turned away from the giant we had seen. This thing was not a man, and being near it made me feel so hopeless that I can't even begin to explain it. It felt like all the happiness, hope, and good in the world had been sucked out and replaced by despair and pain. We finally got up and looked at the animal. Each hand had 6 fingers. It had big hands that could wrap around my middle. It had 2 rows of teeth in its mouth, and each one was as long as my finger. The hair on its head and beard was an unnatural shade of red. I wrapped my hands around one of its fingers in an attempt to lift its arm. I couldn't even get its hand off of the ground. This sphere still dripping with blood weighed as much as the locks we use in training. That requires 6 men to lift above our heads. We stepped into the cave, seeing hundreds of human bones, chunks of skin tissue and military uniforms literally pile in the corner where hundreds of weapons. Modern guns like Enforce and Falls, rusted out AK-47s and ancient rotting swords, spears and shields. It's like it was keeping trophies. An unmarked Chinook showed up. 15 minutes later a bunch of spooks walked out. Once said, "Grab the fucking clowns." Thanks for the intel. The team sergeant yelled. The agents never made eye contact. They unloaded a forklift and cargo net, wrapping up the beast and loading them into the Chinook. Captain Stone motioned for me to come over. I asked if he was doing his closure report. He said, "No, wait for it." Shortly after, one of the agents walked over and pulled out a piece of paper. It was a pre-field closure report detailing how we had been ambushed by Al-Qaeda. He had been killed before. We scared them off. He said, "Sign here, captains." Don't sign, and motioned for me to do the same with a threatening look. The agent said, "You can never speak of this." He turned to walk away and I asked, "What's an F?" He paused a moment early, then walked off. When we returned to back room, we did a full debrief. Some book sat in the corner the entire time to ensure we didn't speak about the giant. After the brief, my commander told me to shower and meet him at the smoke pit in 20 minutes. "Did your electronics?" Lieutenant Colonel Williams handed me a cigar. As I approached the smoke pit, he asked me what I had actually seen on mission and then explained to me that 6 other teams had encountered this giant. Most were less lucky than we were. He informed me that he was trying to figure out what the hell they were, and he did eventually. But that's a story for another day. My first engagement with the giant set off a chain of events that brought me to the truth of those evil beings. After the mission was over, I was approached by one of the team guys. He removed this ad to reveal a kipper underneath. "Sir? Do you want to know what that thing said to you when it charged?" he asked. I nodded without hesitation. "It said, 'Son of Yeshua, I will eat your soul.'" He then looked me in the eye and said, "We've killed dozens of these things. We're figuring out what they are, and it's not good. Head out with us on mission tomorrow and I'll fill you in."